Speak up, don't shut up. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay to get your girlfriends all around you and have discussions over coffee, over a glass of wine. Just let it be part of your life. It already is, by the way.
Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions.
Welcome back to Women We Should Know, the podcast where we always bring to you the voices, the audacity, the courage of women who are coloring outside of the lines, challenging the status quo because they are refusing to get into boxes that were created by someone else. They are carving new pathways and they are leaving a torch behind for us to follow. These are women who we aspire to be and who we may not realize we have more in common with than what we had originally dreamed. It is always an honor to bring these women to meet you. And today we have an amazing woman indeed. I just finished, no, I'm not looking at the camera, but you know me, I'm going to do what I do on here. I just finished reading her book this weekend and I might have to read it again. Now, you've heard me say that about a book before. There's just so much in there that speaks to women, and we'll get into all of that. But first, let me tell you who this is. This is Karen Hinton. She is a Mississippi native and a nationally recognized media professional in Washington, D.C. and in New York. Best known for her role as press secretary to both former Housing Secretary Andrew Cuomo, oh no, there's a name we know, and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, oops, we know that one too. Hinton played what was in the clash between Cuomo, now the former governor of New York, and Mayor de Blasio. The New York Times called the clash one of America's ugliest political feuds. And this woman had the brass to stand in there and claim her space within the entire event. We love women like that. Hinton cut her teeth as the press secretary for the first Black congressman from Mississippi since Reconstruction in 1986. The Democratic National Committee hired her in 1989, serving a similar role for Ron Brown, who was the first Black chairman of the DNC and a key political strategist to elect Bill Clinton as president in 1995. Hinton joined the Clinton administration as press secretary for Cuomo at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. During the time, President Clinton began to face charges of womanizing and worse. We remember those days. Hinton later relocated to New York and became Mayor de Blasio's press secretary. She found herself at the center of the crossfire between longtime frenemies, I like that term, Cuomo and de Blasio, often becoming the subject of news coverage herself. And then at the height of her career, she experienced a surprise. Things like this come as a surprise, a surprising brain injury. And I'm going to save that little piece. I want to speak about that with her. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce to you Karen Hinton. How are you, Karen?
I'm doing well and enjoying the conversations that I'm having with you, and really appreciate your having me on your show. Thank you so much.
Oh, you are so welcome, and thank you for being here. We have a lot of big topics to discuss today, kind of heavy topics. So I'm going to start with my little fun tradition, just have a little lightness to begin with. I enjoy asking my guests at the beginning, what is not in your bio that you would be willing to share with our listeners?
What is not in my bio? Okay, two things come to mind. One, I was a school teacher in rural Mississippi in between two campaigns. And it was the hardest job I've ever had. You read my bio, you know
Yes,
that
I
I lived
do.
in Washington and New York City. But being a school teacher in a small town, I was even asked to teach Spanish, and I had had 18 hours of Spanish at Ole Miss. And so that qualified me to teach Spanish. So, I did my Yo hablo español,
Oh
but
my.
it, it was tough going. And, I had to prepare the night before for everything I said to my students the next day. But they loved me and I loved them, and we just pushed right through it. But I also taught creative writing and English, and it was a tremendous experience for me because I got to interact with these young kids, Black and white. It was actually a integrated school. And in Greenville, Mississippi, they had a white academy, a private academy. And most of the public schools were predominantly Black children and kids and teenagers. But this one actually was mixed. And it was a great experience for me to have, kids that mostly came from low-income families. And so I had to, I learned a lot about families and what they were struggling with in their own lives. And because I became almost like a psychiatrist, a therapist, right? Not only
Sure.
did I speak Spanish, I also taught therapy. But it was a great time. The other little unknown about me is I was a cocktail waitress in Aspen, Colorado for a skiing season, because I got it in my head at one point in my life that I needed to learn how to snow ski. Growing up in Mississippi, all I ever learned to do was water ski, right? So I thought I could snow ski too. Two different sports, however, and
Completely different skill sets.
yes, exactly. But I was a cocktail waitress, and I really enjoyed that as well, because I met people from all across the globe who came to Aspen to ski, and a lot of them had money, and a lot of them came to the restaurant that I chose to work in while I skied.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a good decision, actually, finding the right place to work in Aspen. And some people may say I didn't do a very good job finding a place to work in Washington and in New York.
Right.
But Cuomo versus you read about the Cuomo versus de Blasio.
Yes.
Anyway, those are my two unknowns.
Well, those are great fun. And Aspen's it's just about 3 minutes up the road from me, metaphorically.
Right.
It's still that place that you
Yeah.
knew when you were a cocktail waitress. It's still a place where the wealthier individuals from our country go to ski. And so for a young woman getting ready to walk the path you were going to walk, that had to be advantageous.
Well, I learned a lot about wealth versus poverty because I had two jobs.
Yes.
One in extremely low income area of the country,
yes.
And one in the wealthiest part of the country. Right. And so I learned a lot about the triumphs, the challenges, and the test for trying to figure out how to help low-income kids, and sometimes even rich kids who also have problems and have so many opportunities in front of them, but yet it doesn't always come easy for them either.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It really doesn't. I've come through my career to understand it doesn't matter which side of the fence you grow up on, there are challenges on both sides. So,
But like I've always said, I'd rather be rich than poor.
me too.
And if I had a lot of money, I know what I would do with it. And I would work with low-income kids in a more direct way than I do now. I
Right.
try my best to do it through communications, but I would love it if I could start my own foundation. And I hope others in the wealthiest areas of the country will do the same and do more of.
Okay, women out there.
Right.
Which one of you is already in the process of building a foundation who wants to reach out to Karen? Because we are a family here. We are a community here, and we believe in supporting each other and doing it, not just talking about it. So I'm going to call you out, invite you to get a hold of Karen when this is all done.
Absolutely. I love that.
Let's move forward to your amazing book, Penis Politics. A memoir of women, men, and power. Why did you write the book? There was so much vulnerability and self-reveal and self-reflection in the book. It was absolutely courageous. Why did you start the project?
I started to write the book because of my brain injury, which we can talk about at some point. But I'd had a really bad accident, and I had to recover from learning how to walk and talk and write and think. And those were things that my career had been developed around. Not that I was a great thinker, but I had to think at times.
Sure.
And it became very difficult during my recovery, and it was very frustrating. And I just so happened to come across a diary that I had written in high school. And it was full of old stories, funny stories, hilarious stories, laughable. When I read it, I was crying, laughing, and screaming all at once, And I started telling my husband about these stories, and he said, you should start writing. Just write down what you're saying and see if you can work on that and make it all come together. Now, it didn't happen overnight by any means. It took me a long time to write the 90,000 or so words that I wrote. And I had a lot of help, and I had good editors, and my husband Howard was one of them. But there were other people in my life, women friends, who read either the whole book or they read parts of it for me and helped me with it. And so it was part of my recovery. And I tell you that if I had not had the accident, I would have never written the book, because I would have been employed. I would be working in politics, in environmental issues, low income issues, housing. I would have stayed right where I was. And so I'm not glad I had the accident by any means. No. But as a result of it, I had time to write it, and I had help to write it. And so that is why I wrote it, but also because, the Me Too movement had started in 2017.
Yes.
And I was actually working with a group of women in New York City. I was working for a PR firm then, in terms of working with the Me Too group of women. And so I just started that when I had the accident. So after it was over, I was still, not over, but as I was recovering, I started following the news. And of course, there were still more stories being told by women, mostly in the movie film industry. And so, and as I was reading my diary, I said, my God, all of this is coming together for me, and it's helping my brain tick again. gradually over time. And I started putting all these things together. And one day, out of the blue, I said to my husband, this is just penis politics. It's just some men, not all men, but some men need this gratification of their power, their control, their authority. And they use women in a way to get there, to feel good about themselves. It's almost a sense of inferiority in a way, because they feel conflicted about who they are.
Right.
And so they need to just show that power, show that control. And if they don't have it, it just pisses them off. So they, that sort of internal struggle becomes an outward abuse of women in various ways. And so that's why I wrote it. And that's why I called it Penis Politics.
That's brilliant. And I could actually see how, because of your personal experiences with sexual impropriety and the trauma that comes with that, even if you are not experiencing the worst that someone has to offer, I could see how that would trigger parts of your brain and help you to put your life and your story and your thinking patterns back together.
Exactly. That is exactly what happened. And I started to see the lines crossing and running together. And I thought, and certainly there were so many stories about men of power, men with money, and the media covered the film industry, as well as the media industry, because there were allegations against Matt Lauer at NBC, and there was CBS, and there was Fox.
Grocery List.
Right. It was a great, yeah. And I thought, you know what? We're not really getting to the story about women who are just middle class, low income. And the more I read about it, the more I realized, my God, it's pervasive. It's everywhere. And it's not just in powerful offices that make decisions about government or about corporations, but it's also in the grocery store.
It is.
It's in the school system. It's in sports. It's in romance. It's in our lives. And we have to come together as humans and figure this out and solve it. And I really came to understand that. And I wanted to tell stories about, not about just what happened to me, because on that spectrum, it's not as bad as has happened to other women. And women I knew, girls I knew. And that's why the beginning of the book is really about my high school days, when a very close friend of mine is raped by a school official in the book room of the school. And then I tell that story. And that's really the most of my time is spent about the sexism in Mississippi, the racism in Mississippi, because my life really does take off in politics. And then of course I'm writing about racism in Mississippi as a journalist. And then I'm also covering political elections. And then I become basically a spokesperson in politics. But Mississippi really is at the core of who I am and what this book is about, and how it followed me throughout my career. So when I was recovering from the accident, my husband and I took a trip on Amtrak all the way from New York City to New Orleans. And it was on I think they call it the Crescent City route. And I love New Orleans. I've always loved New Orleans. I grew up only 2 hours away from the city.
Mhm.
And I just realized, that connection between these two places that have been part of my life for so long, New Orleans and New York City, both countries that have historical ties. This is kind of off the topic, but Lafayette was hanging out down here in New Orleans
That's
when
right.
he was also hanging out in New York City, right?
That's right.
So there's just this sort of connection. And I really am glad now that I'm here back in the South, because I sort of found my footing again after a struggle with both my recovery as well as my politics in New York.
Right, right. There's so much to unpack here, Karen. So much to unpack. Let's start with the school, because in the news just this week, all of the news coming out about these the abuses of religious leaders and ministers and what have you. And these are children. This topic lands really close to home for me, as my listeners know. So what do you hope to be able to contribute?
Yes.
To not just the conversation, but to the development of solutions or watch committees, whatever it is, to begin to allow our children to be more safe within what should be an inherently safe environment.
Yes, that's exactly right. And my goal with the book was to speak about not shutting up, but speaking up about what happened to you as a woman, and not be afraid to do that. And I saw that with the women who spoke up about Andrew Cuomo. They were all much younger than me, right? They're in their 20s and 30s. And they had the courage to step out of the box that you talked about earlier, and really say, here's what happened to me and here's why. And it was a spectrum, of really terrible things, when he took his hand and put it down into a woman's breast over her bra, to, touching someone on the back or caressing them around the tummy. It was this, spectrum, but they still did it, and they spoke out with courage. And that's what I hope my book will do as well, is give women the courage to speak up, not shut up, about what's happened to them. And that's why I wanted to tell stories about what happened. I didn't want to have a list. Here are 10 things that you can do. Because there are things like that out there now to help women through this trauma. And that's not my expertise. My expertise was just telling stories. But I do think that that is the best way to get at this problem. And also to challenge men to join women in this battle to end kind of sexual harassment, misconduct, and abuse, wherever you are, whether it's in the workplace or at home or in college or in sports and in church.
In church,
and in the Southern Baptist Association, has released, all that came out about that. And that was just maddening that at my age, it's still happening, because I saw it when I was in Mississippi. I didn't write about this much in the book, and I wish I had now, but we had a minister, a preacher at the church where I grew up, and he was known for flirting and supposedly having an affair with one of the women in the church, or maybe more than one, actually. Now that I think about it. And and that is another example, though, of someone with authority.
Yes.
and he has authority over a flock of
That's
people
right.
who come to, learn about the Lord, learn about God, learn about Jesus, whatever religion you're in. And, when he says something, people listen. And when he does something, a woman could be in a situation where she feels like, okay, I need that kind of attention. I need that kind of love.
Yes.
When in fact you don't need it. You can get it within yourself, not through a preacher or a principal or a school official or a coach. And we've seen this so many times in news coverage. I get a sexual harassment Google alert every day,
Mhm.
and I get 50 or more that I can't even read them all, of what's happening across the globe. It's not just always about here
Right.
in this country, but everywhere. And and that is really tough to think about when you have individuals who are in a position of authority,
Mhm.
using that authority to manipulate and harm women in the way that it happens, especially in religion.
Yes.
And that is very, very frightening. And, I think the more we talk about it, the less likely it is that men will do it. And especially if other men get in the position of defining it and dismissing it. So they
Mhm.
say to a man who's working with them, hey, buddy, you better stop that because you're going to get in trouble.
That's right.
I could get in trouble, and it could
Right.
hurt the company.
Right.
It could hurt the team. It
Right.
could hurt the church.
Right.
So cut it out. Stop it.
Right. I remember about 6 months ago, there were a series of reports of severe sexual impropriety. And at that point, what I started seeing across social media, and it's still there, and it gave me such hope and inspiration, was men wearing t-shirts that says, until it's no men, it is all men, and standing up for women to be able to acknowledge that if you don't know who's dangerous, everyone is dangerous.
Right. That's exactly right. And that sort of goes back to my time in high school. Most of the teachers were women, and the few men who were there were either they were a coach or a principal or an assistant principal. And that was true for my high school. There was a coach who taught junior high basketball for girls. And we looked up to him. We thought he was a good coach and smart. He then gets promoted to assistant principal. We still call him coach because that's what we always called him, coach.
Right.
But he, during summer, when one of my best friends, Janice, is employed to work during the summer for the front office, and she is given the job of organizing the book room. And the book room, is sort of off from the main office. It's kind of tucked away. And she's in there, and she sort of uses it as a place to read too, when she's like gets a break. So she takes some time, and she always was a reader, very smart young girl. And so she's in the book room, and she hears the door open and slam, and there's the coach. And he takes advantage of the situation that he's in a dark book room. She can't get out, and she doesn't know what to do with that. And I go into the details of what happened in the book room, because that afternoon she calls me and says, we have to meet. We have to talk about coach. So we do. Two other girls who were close to come on the scene, and we hear what happened, and we're shocked. We're sad. We're also kind of like, oh my goodness, what does all this mean? We don't really know anything about rape. Nobody's ever talked to us about rape. We don't, in our minds, it was just something bad,
Right.
something wrong, but we didn't call it rape because we had never been educated about what something like that was. But she told
And
us,
that's part of the problem right
Yeah.
there, is young girls are not educated in how to become aware of predators, how to protect themselves around predators, how to feel like they have permission to speak out about a predator.
exactly. I mean, home economics was usually the class that the girls took, right?
Mhm.
And we never learned anything about sex.
No,
I mean, it's part of home, being married and in a home, but we never learned anything about that. So we were very perplexed about how to handle it. And
Right.
but we said to her, you need to tell somebody. You need to tell your mom and your daddy. You need to tell the principal. Well, what are we going to do? And she says, no, we're not telling anybody. And you've got to be quiet about it. You cannot say a word. Only you guys can know, because you're my best friends, because I don't want anybody to know. I'm ashamed
of course.
of
And
it
there it
happening.
is.
I don't want anybody to know those details except you,
Yes.
because you're my friend.
Yes.
But you can't tell anyone.
Yes.
And we didn't. We kept quiet about the whole thing. And as her life continues, she has good and bad things that happen to her,
Mhm.
but she was so smart and so bright and also very attractive.
Mhm.
And but she wasn't pompous about it at all.
Mhm.
She was just a kind, wonderful 16-year-old, right?
Right.
And we all wanted to be like her. And then a year later, she drops out of school.
Mm.
She marries this guy who has joined the Navy, and he wants to get married and have her come be with him. But military life is so hard, and
It's hard.
I didn't know it then, but I
Right.
know it now. And she, for a year, she goes away from us, and we are just devastated by losing her. And of course, she loses the same thing, the
Mhm.
kind of friendship, but also
Times
opportunity.
4, because
Right.
you
But-
each lost one, but you still had each other. She lost the entire safety net.
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
And one of our teachers called us a coterie. We were a coterie, and we love that word. We're coterie. And we would even sometimes pretend, because we would come dressed with the same shirt sometimes on Fridays.
Right.
And people started thinking that we were gay. We didn't use the word gay. I think we used the word queer. Then you're queers, and we would say, yes, we're queer. So what? And we would like blow kisses at each other, to sort of just antagonize people who wanted to be nasty to us. But we were very, very close. And so we lost her, she lost us. But she didn't go to college.
Right.
I don't know if she ever got her GED, but she didn't graduate from high school.
Mhm.
And her path changed as a result of the rape.
Right.
Her path changed, and would her life had been better had she not gotten on that path? Who knows, right? We can't read. We're not
Right.
fortune tellers. But I believe that if she had gone to college, if she had had a career,
Mm.
that some of the things that happened to her later would not have happened.
Right.
And you have to read the book in order to know the ending of that story.
Absolutely. And
But-
all of you should read this book, because while Karen's been sharing this story of her youth, this important story of her youth, there are stories throughout the book that speak to virtually every woman. I cannot imagine a woman who cannot relate, either directly or through a friend or through something they witnessed or through something they heard in their office, This is a book for all women. Now, that's my opinion. Who did you see as your audience? Who did you write the book for?
Well, I wrote the book for the women who I had become close to, or I was friends with, or I worked with.
Mhm,
And I told their stories as well.
mhm.
And then I wanted for other women to say, as they read the book, oh my God, that happened to me.
Yes,
That's exactly like what happened to me.
yes.
And I got that so often from people who would email me or call me, or I would meet or see.
Mhm,
They would say, well, let me tell you my story.
mhm.
And I got so much from people who were wanting to tell their story and
Mhm.
just never had had the opportunity. Women who had been harassed in the workplace, who had been discriminated in the workplace, um, some who had been abused, physically abused, attacked,
Mhm.
just men constantly asking them for sex or some sort of flirtatious moment. And everybody had something to say about their own lives or a friend of theirs.
Yes,
Just like you said, that's the way it works now. It's so pervasive.
it's
And
so pervasive.
yeah, and so for example, when I was working for Andrew Cuomo when he was housing secretary at during the Clinton administration, he interviewed a friend of mine for a job,
Mhm.
and she was so wired in Congress. I mean, she knew so many members of Congress. She also knew their chief of staffs, their
Right,
legislative people, and the position was for intergovernmental affairs, which that she was perfect for that job.
right,
And I was big on her, and I was, saying, you really should hire her. She's coming in for an interview. And he
right.
asked me to sit in on the interview. And at the end, and I thought the interview was going fine,
Mhm.
right? And he says after the interview, I said, what do you think? He says, we're not going to hire her. And I'm like, what? Why not? He goes, she's not very attractive. She's not pretty. I don't like it. We'll get somebody else. I was like, what? I can't believe you just said that to me. I said that to him. I said, I can't believe you just said that to me. That is like, you're discriminating against her. And he ended up hiring a white man. So I guess maybe it was somebody who kind of looked like him. So maybe he just thought he was so gorgeous that he'd hire somebody.
Who
Anyway,
knows? Who knows? But that's just
example.
one more thing. You add one more thing there that women go through all the time. She's not that attractive.
Mhm. Right.
As if that should have anything to do with anything.
that,
And that is a sexualizing of the woman, but it's also putting up roadblocks, putting up different roadblocks for the women. It was not lost on me. I have to ask you about this.
Okay.
You had your relationship with Bill Clinton. You had your relationship with Cuomo in your professional relationships. Let me specify your
Mhm.
professional relationships with these two men. And you speak of how they were legitimately committed to social justice, to rights for people of color, and even to rights for women, and in Bill Clinton's case, the LGBTQIA community. But then you had got to see this other side, this more perpetrator side. There's an old saying that says, may you never meet your heroes.
Right.
Was that had to be conflicting, I would imagine.
Oh, it was terrible. And it gets down to the point I made about shutting up or speaking up.
Mhm.
And I had never really talked about the time that Bill Clinton had hit on me in a bar in Greenville, Mississippi, when I'm 24 or 5 years old. And it was 1984. And nobody was talking about sexual harassment. Nobody was really making it a big deal at all, other than it was, for me, it was shocking and annoying. And I couldn't believe he had actually made the overture to me in the way he did it. And he was married, and I'm like, my God, you're married. What are you doing? Right.
Right.
But I never really spoke about it until the Monica Lewinsky thing happened. And now I'm working for Andrew Cuomo. This was now 1994, 95. And all the other women, came out about Bill Clinton when he was running for election in 1992. I didn't think he would win because of it. I thought it would hurt him, but it didn't. He pulled him, he figured it out, and his people knew how to handle the messaging on it, and it didn't defeat him. It elected him, maybe, but
AP.
right. But then Monica Lewinsky comes on the scene in 1998, and I was horrified by the way not only Bill Clinton handled it, but also the people around him, the way they handled it. He was lying. And it was clear to everybody who worked for him that he was lying. And here I am working. I mean, I don't know Bill Clinton that well. I mean, I had just met him once. I'd been around him a couple of times. But I was working for Andrew Cuomo. So in effect, I was working with the Clinton administration, but I had witnessed it over and over and over again on the Hill when I worked for Mike Espy, who was the first Black congressman from Mississippi, when I worked for Ron Brown at the Democratic National Committee, and then when I'm working for Andrew Cuomo. I'd just seen the same thing happening to my friends, to women I knew, women on Capitol Hill that find themselves in very difficult positions of flirting, asking you to sleep with them, the whole thing. And did you get the promotion because of it? Or did you not get the promotion because you didn't do it? Right. So I was just done with it by 1998. And Michael Isikoff, who wrote for Newsweek and the Washington Post, and then wrote a book about Clinton, I had met him through another reporter, and he was wanting me to tell my story for his book. And I just said, well, it's a minor thing. I didn't sleep with him, right? And the stories are all about women who slept with him.
Sure.
He said, no, but it shows a pattern of behavior. And if you would go on the record, that would really help my book. And I finally decided to do it because I was just tired of shutting up. I wanted to speak up about it because I felt badly for Monica Lewinsky, and we see what happened to her life. She's now in her mid 40s, I think. And she is Monica Lewinsky. And that's all she is.
For life.
For her life, for her entire life. It's the woman who had a relationship with the President of the United States while she was in the Oval Office. And that's who we know now. That's all she will ever be.
That is all she'll always be the protagonist in the story. If he had declined, the whole story would have gone away. It wouldn't have been a story, but she acknowledged being the protagonist. So for the rest of her life, because he went along with the game and shouldn't have, she is, that Monica Lewinsky person.
Right, but she was young. Everybody said, well, she's 21. Well, hell, 21 is young, and
it is.
Knew about her life. And it was, she made some bad decisions, but she was not the problem.
Exactly. Like I said, if he had turned her down, the whole thing would have just
Yeah.
Not existed.
Exactly.
Not
And-
existed.
And he lied. And not only that, then his people around him, James Carville, who, we hold him on a podium, a political podium
We
of
do.
intelligence, right? About life, big picture. I see him on CNN and MSNBC. And this was a man who said, she's trailer park trash. She's
Mhm.
a bimbo. Those guys around him, George Stephanopoulos, who made it big on ABC.
That's right.
Right. He was one coming up with bimbo,
Mhm.
trailer park trash, liars. You can't believe them. They're manipulating. They want some time on television. They want to be famous for 15 minutes. I mean, mean, just choking them around the neck. It was awful. And I just said, I don't know that really my story will matter that much. And it was like 4 or 6 pages or so in Isakov's book, but I did my part. And I felt good about it. Now, Andrew Cuomo was angry that I had done this because I was still working for him. But I was also tired of Andrew Cuomo by that time. I was
Mhm.
just tired of his behavior. But he didn't fire me. But he didn't fire me because if he had fired me, that would have been a story, right?
That would have been a story.
That would have been a story. But he didn't. But he took away the position of Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs.
He cut your legs out from under you. He didn't fire you. He just cut your legs out from under
He
you.
just cut my legs out, right? And they didn't give me that job because you had to be confirmed by the Senate
Right.
for an assistant secretary job. And it's great for a resume. I wanted it on my resume, but he took it away from me. He basically told the White House, yeah, just don't give her the assistant secretary job. And we'll take that away from her and she'll understand then, what she did, right?
Right.
So I was like,
Bad
okay,
girl, bad girl.
bad girl, right? Exactly.
Yes.
So lots of stories in between as well from the
Of
time I
course.
worked.
Of
Yeah.
course. What do you say? Women are 5.53% of the population, which means we are 5.53% of the voting public.
Right. Mhm.
What do you say to women about this? Because we have to accept some responsibility for the fact that women aren't stepping up and saying, no, they're continuing to vote for these people. They know that, as in the case of Clinton in his second term, they know that this is going on. Women are potentially the worst enablers,
Mhm.
even worse than their old boy club buddies.
Mhm.
What do we say to women to get them to start valuing themselves more? Because that's what it comes down to.
Yes, that is so important. And I saw it with Andrew's enablers as governor.
Yes.
Many of them were women, are women.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate because when you attach yourself to a politician who is harassing, abusing, having sexual misconduct with women in his office,
Mhm.
and that's happening. All of the women who now are supporting Andrew when they work for him, still supporting him, they knew that was happening. They knew it. And so why do you keep attaching yourself to someone like that?
Mhm.
Let it go and move on. You made a mistake. That's the way I felt. I made a mistake. I'm moving on. And they haven't done that. And I don't, it's hard to understand why, because it hurts you ultimately in your own career, in your own positioning for what you want to do in the future.
Mhm.
And I see that happening with some of those women.
Mhm.
But we all have to understand that we need to make it possible for women to succeed. And for that, whether it's at home or at work or wherever you are, and that everyone around that woman has to be supportive
Yes.
of each other. And that's why I think it's so important for men to be involved in this and to do the same as women, which is say, no, it's not going to happen. And that we need to vote for politicians who make this part of their platform, men and women, and they should be talking about it. And I think sometimes when we make a decision about voting for someone, we weigh all these things. Where are they on choice? Where are they on guns? Where are they on women's rights?
Women's rights, immigration, systemic racism. Where do they stand on all of this?
Right. And what they say publicly is important. And certainly Democrats lean more toward all of those issues than Republicans do. But at the same time, you have to understand what you say publicly and what you do privately can be two different things.
That's right.
So you really have to try to, we as a society and the reporters covering the politicians need to try to really understand what that dynamic is. And we should ask the candidate, okay, publicly, you're going to be supporting women's rights, but we want to make sure that you're not doing this in the office, that you're not violating the very things you say publicly you're supporting. And that was true of Cuomo, because he was supportive of sexual harassment laws in New York. And even had a group of women who came and signed the bill with him, women who were big leaders. I think Gloria Steinem was there for the signing. So, and then he turns around and breaks his own law, right?
Exactly.
So we have to keep a button on that and say, where are you on making sure that in your own office this doesn't happen?
You said something very important that I've not heard said before, and that is it has to be part of the platform. It has to be part of the conversation. There has to be a level of transparency, active transparency that we have not seen before, that we have not even had the courage to demand before.
That's right. That's right. And reporters don't always focus on that as much as they should. And I hope they will going forward. So they ask that very question. Okay, you say you're in favor of women's rights. What are you going to do in your office?
Yes.
Whether it's you violating it or your chief of staff who is a male,
yes,
or your legislative person who's a
yes,
man. What are you going to do in your office? And make that be a part of that platform.
Yes.
That we hear them answer those kinds of questions.
Right. And that they are open to the possibility, not even just the possibility, that they are open to initiating and instituting and continuing to enforce communication, conversation, so that there is a freedom to be expressive. And I'm never going to get off women's backs. I'm just not, because we have too much power that we are squandering by not stepping up and not speaking out.
We're the majority.
We are the majority
in this country.
And if you want to say, oh, well, it was nothing, I invite you to do one thing, just one thing. Take yourself out of the frame. Put your 14, 16, 18-year-old daughter or granddaughter in the frame. Is it still nothing?
Oh, yeah. No. Oh, right on, right on. That is so very important. I mean, I dedicated my book to my 4 children. 3 are young women and one young man. th- Three of them are stepchildren, and then my daughter. And I want to make sure that they are treated correctly in the workplace and they understand the dynamic that they will face. And I have no
And that
doubt.
they know they have the right to demand it for themselves.
Yes. And I think they actually do.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure you've done a great job, Karen.
I'm not that worried about them, but when it happens to them, I want them to make sure they don't get nervous and
Right.
lack courage, and they better tell me about it, and they better tell their daddy about it, and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And my son, my stepson, I have no doubt that he will treat women with respect and value them if they were to work as colleagues with him, or he was their boss, or a woman is his boss. That all of that is done with respect, and treat them fairly. And that's all women are asking for, really, is to be treated with respect and treated fairly.
Yes.
And that's it. That's it. And in some ways, it's not that hard.
It's not. And let us not overlook the fact this is absolutely not arguable. Women birth 100% of the children.
Right.
Period.
Period.
And according to all Pew Research, all the research facilities, women are 77.7% of the influence of kids. So let's use that, women. Let's use that. Now, I can tell, Karen, we can go on and on and on.
Yes, I would love to.
And so for our listeners, we are going to go on and on and on. Karen clearly is dedicated to this and so informed and educated on this topic. I am dedicated to this and not as informed, but I'm going to become so. Not that I'm uninformed, but Karen's the expert. She's the resident expert. And it is really important that we all pay attention and that we all work to give each other permission to be bolder. So, in addition to the fact that I'm going to invite you to go and like and subscribe, I want you to think just for a minute. What woman do you know who really needs to hear what Karen had to say today? And I want you to share that forward with at least one woman. And then I have a little bonus for you. Well, we both do together. We conjured this for you, listeners. We conjured it, women. We're going to create a series of 1-minute reels talking on this topic, speaking to this topic. And we will be launching them on all of Karen's social media, on all of my social media. We invite you to comment. We invite you to share. We invite you to become part of the conversation. You can agree with us, you can disagree with us, but become part of the conversation. Right, Karen?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just like I said, speak up, don't shut up. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay to get your girlfriends all around you and have discussions over coffee, over a glass of wine. Just let it be part of your life. It already is, by the way. It's a part of all of our lives.
Yes.
So let's talk about it.
Let's take it out of the closet.
Out of the closet.
Put it out. Let it breathe, knock the dust off, and let's have conversations. Karen, thank you so much for today. This has been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me. I don't know if I'm brilliant, but I appreciate the compliment. Women have a hard time taking compliments sometimes. So I appreciate yours. And I really have loved talking to you and having this conversation.
Thank you. And like I told you, women, we're going to keep going. We're going to have these 1-minute conversations. We must take this out of the closet. We must take this out of the back corners. And we are the only ones who can. And we have the power. 50.53% of the population. That's how much power we have. So, like, subscribe, and share this episode with a woman you know. Maybe may not be speaking about what's going on in her life, but you just have a sense that this is a good episode for her to listen to. Tune in to Karen Hinton on Instagram, and like I always do for you, I'm going to put her bio and I'm going to put all of her social media links in the program notes. And of course, you know where to find me. So start looking for those reels on all of our social media, starting with Instagram. Let's all have a conversation together. And as you go through the rest of your day, I just want to remind you, you truly are stronger and wiser than you know.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We hope you received inspiration for expanding your own social innovation and influence. Help us inspire others by sharing this episode and leaving your comments over at lesliemichaels.com/podcast. For more tips, insights, and support in creating a fully audacious, professional, and personal lifestyle you love, visit our Women We Should Know community on Facebook.